identifying the learning needs of organizations. Now, in the beginning of this overview session, I did mention that this unit could be useful to those of you that are thinking of becoming a trainer, learning and development practitioner within, for instance, the corporate world or private sector organization. So think about that when you are choosing your units as part of this level and this diploma as well. Think about your career path and think about what is the next level for you, what is the next step for you when you are choosing the optional units. So the aim of this unit is to assess your learning and development competence in carrying out a learning or training needs analysis for an organization. Organization in this context is taken to mean any group or team learning together as well as a whole organization. So here we're focusing on organizations and identifying the learning needs of organizations. Now let's dive in. So what is learning needs analysis? First of all, we are going to look into defining a learning needs analysis. Learning needs analysis is a process which allows organizations to identify existing capability, to identify the desired and required capability, so what needs to be achieved in terms of capability, and also to identify the gap between the existing and the desired capability. So you, as an effective learning and development practitioner or a trainer, you are responsible for helping the organization close the gap between the existing capability and the desired capability. You are responsible for taking the employees on a journey of bridging that gap to ensure that the performance of the overall organization is improved. Okay? So, when it comes to approaches to learning needs analysis, for the purpose of today's overview session, we're not going to go into too much detail because, there is a lot for us to cover in here, but I have picked some of the most common approaches that organizations tend to take when it comes to learning needs analysis. Some organizations are very reactive in their approach. What does this mean? That means that training is organized when something goes wrong. So for instance, someone does something wrong, someone, it's not compliant, or a key piece of legislation has been missed, and then the organization is in trouble. So then they identify a need. It's a reactive approach to identifying the needs. Something has happened and then they need to act upon it in order to rectify the issue. And then as a part of rectifying the issue, there is a need for a team member or an entire team or the whole organization to be trained. Okay, so this is kind of the reactive approach. Then some organizations also take the active or planned approach. This is when training is organized based on identifying learning needs on plan basis and using specific methods. So a couple of times during the year, there will be certain processes that will be followed for learning needs to be identified, and then training is organized as a result of that. And I want to give you an example of this. So for instance, think about employee engagement questionnaires, right? Some of these questionnaires or surveys are usually sent out to employees once a year, right? But some companies like to send them twice a year. And in those engagement surveys, the human resources department and the training department could formulate questions that allow the organization to understand what training is wanted, what training is required, and then they could plan it in the future as well. So most organizations in the UK are at least, well, I could not perhaps say most organizations, but I could say based on my experience in working with different corporate brands in my role as a trainer, coach, facilitator, most organizations adopt the active approach where there are regular engagement surveys, interviews with employees, focus groups, and they are aware of what learning needs are out there and what they could be doing in order to meet those learning needs. Some organizations have entire training teams, entire assessment centers. So here in the UK, the active approach is quite popular. Okay, and widely adopted. Then the third approach is proactive. So the proactive approach is where we continuously analyze and plan activities to meet learning needs. And then think about emerging or future organizations. Think about a startup, for instance. That is quite kind of a useful and relevant example here. So when you are, let's say you join startup organization as a trainer. So here you may not necessarily know exactly what the you may know what the required capabilities are, but the organization being a startup, as it evolves and progresses to the next level, then new needs are going to come up, new areas, and you would have to continuously evaluate. You need to be proactive in your approach, and the organization itself would need to be proactive in its approach in order to meet ever emerging needs. So when the company is launched, and especially when companies are launched, startups, and then they grow kind of quickly, then there will be the need to constantly evaluate and really be proactive in your observation and identification of different needs to ensure that the organization has the necessary capability, the startup, to continue evolving and to continue growing. So these are just examples here where more established organizations, they tend to have more of an active approach, and some new organizations, emerging organizations such as startups, they have more of a proactive approach. But again, that would very much depend on the organization. So we're going to talk about that in much more detail as part of Unit 5. We're also going to talk about the different factors affecting the need for learning needs analysis. So why do we even conduct learning needs analysis? We are going to look at those factors from the perspective of organizations. So why does an organization need to conduct learning needs analysis? We're also going to look into learning needs analysis from the perspective of team or a department, and then also an individual. So here, to kind of take a very brief moment, if we're looking at learning needs analysis from the perspective of an organization and why organizations are interested in conducting them, well, it could be for the purposes of succession planning, it could be part of their strategy, it could be because they're developing new products, new services, or it could be because there has been a change in legislation. Again, the example that I can think of, that I keep thinking of, is the pandemic and how key legislation has been introduced. So organizations will need to ensure that everyone is on board, everyone is trained, everyone is aware, so that they comply with those legislations. Also mergers and acquisitions, when a company merges with another company, or when a company acquires another company, then there is a change, again, change of responsibilities, change of culture. So this is where organizations could be looking into conducting learning needs analysis in order to ensure that they have the necessary capability, or they're building the necessary capability within the organization. Again, introduction of new technology, which is kind of pretty much ongoing, as we could see. So this is where we could be conducting learning needs analysis to see what our employees need in order to be able to use the new technology. And on a team department level, here we have again the launch of new services, how to improve the team performance. So, conducting learning needs analysis in terms of what the actual team needs in order to improve how they do their jobs, or how they perform as a team collectively. New changes in procedures, new technology and equipment. Also, when there is requirement for new skills to be developed, or when something wrong happens, like incidents, for instance, external factors. So these are some of the factors that affect the need for learning needs analysis from the perspective of a team. Now let's briefly discuss the perspective of an individual. For instance, if we adopt the perspective of an individual, well, then if you are an employee who is looking to reach the next level, to be promoted, then you could have a conversation, a session with a coach or a trainer within the organization. They could assist you in identifying what is necessary for you to learn and develop a certain skills and competencies in order for you to be promoted. The same applies if you are transferring to another role, or if your role is being changed. Also, as part of performance reviews. Performance reviews are a great way to identify needs, learning needs. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. Apprenticeships, again, there have been many apprenticeships. It's many initiatives that include apprenticeships introduced in the UK to upskill organizations, to upskill workforce within organizations. So learning needs analysis need to be conducted prior to commencing an apprenticeship as well, and also as part, simply as an individual who is looking into continuously progress within their career and develop. Ongoing learning needs analysis to support your continuous professional development. Okay, so we've covered that in quite good detail here, and now we're going to look at the methods. So how do we conduct learning needs analysis? I have already mentioned some of the methods that we could be using, but here on the screen you'll see an example of some of them. Some I already covered, some of them are new here, so have a look. We've got questionnaires, surveys, as I already mentioned. Engagement survey was my example. Focus groups. Also, learning needs could be identified when we observe the performance of an employee, for instance, during appraisal and performance reviews. Also, when we create a skills matrix that is used to measure current skills against the skills that are required. And as I only just mentioned, interviews with individuals and teams. For instance, if an individual wants to progress to the next level, then we could identify the learning needs, their learning needs during an interview, or we could interview an entire team as to what are the gaps in knowledge or skills that need to be filled in order for them to perform better and to be more effective as a team. So these are just some of the examples, and again, I would like to again stress the importance of considering this optional unit if you are looking into becoming a qualified trainer and learning and development practitioner within a private sector organization. Okay, so now we're going to move to Unit 6. So Unit 6 is on the topic